Time for another edition of Good Policies with Mike Barrett from Barrett Insurance Agency, who you'll find on Portland Street in St. Johnsbury. Mike checks in remotely again. Hi, buddy.
Hey, good morning, Burr.
Yeah? What'd you have for temperature this morning?
When I first got outside, it was 0.
Right.
Then I think we inched up to 1 before I left the house this morning.
Oh, no kidding, huh?
Yeah. Pretty exciting times. Single digits.
Yeah,
So.
well, my buddy Garth had 12 below 0. He told me to go to his Facebook page and look at the picture, and I said, no, thanks, I'll take your word for it. 7 below is all I needed to see this morning.
Yeah. But you know what the good thing about it is? This is March. This is the time of the year where the sun is getting warmer, and we can see spring and summer on the horizon. So
well, we can.
Knowing that these are some of the last few bitter cold days, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and we've got spring coming this weekend here. We know it's not immediate, Mike. You know that. We were born and brought up here. But, you always say this in your advertising campaigns, the worst time to find out that your insurance isn't adequate is when you have to use it. So, Now we're looking down the road here. We've got spring this weekend. Warmer weather is coming our way. Spring is going to come. We've got to start thinking about things like floods and flood insurance like that. What do you say we bring that up this morning?
Absolutely. We have not talked flood insurance for a while, and flood insurance is a biggie, okay? So first and foremost, if you are flooded, if your house is flooded, and would it be covered under your homeowner policy? Yes or no? What do you think?
I rent, so I can't answer that question.
All right.
But I'm going to assume.
Let me ask you, let's say you have renter's insurance. If your property floods and damages your contents, do you have coverage on your renter's policy?
I do not.
Aha. Same answer for homeowners. The house wouldn't be covered either. Homeowners insurance specifically excludes water, groundwater, not water, I shouldn't say water. Gosh, that could open up a can of worms. It does cover like frozen pipes and burst plumbing and water leakage, things like that, but it does not cover ground surface water. It does not cover water seepage from coming in, especially this time of year. Maybe not so much this year because we don't have so much snow on the ground, but if you get groundwater seepage that comes into your basement, that's not going to be covered either by your homeowner policy. So if you are in a flood zone or a flood risk or concerned about flood in any way, shape, or form, you need to get a flood insurance policy. What is a flood insurance policy? It is a single peril, meaning it covers one type of loss, flood. That's why they call it a flood policy. Well, that makes perfect sense. There's a couple of ways to do that. So, first off, we'll hit real quick on eligibility. How are you eligible for a flood insurance policy? Well, let me tell you this. Everybody is eligible. Everybody. Now, it's going to be the cost and the type that is going to be different for people, but pretty much everybody can get a flood insurance policy. The most common is the National Flood Insurance Program, known as NFIP, that's administered by FEMA, which is the federal government. In order to be eligible for a FEMA flood insurance policy, you have to be in a town that participates with the National Flood Insurance Program with FEMA. That would include towns, as a couple of examples here, Waterford, St. Johnsbury, Lyndonville. Those are some common towns in the area that participate. There's some other ones as well. I could go through a long list and bore the heck out of you, but I just want to give you some highlights here. So the people who live in those towns are eligible to apply for coverage and get coverage through the National Flood Insurance Program. And there's two types. There's either a preferred or a standard type of flood policy, and what makes you eligible for preferred is whether or not you're in a high-risk flood zone. So, if you're right by a body of water and identified on the FEMA flood maps that you're in what we call a special flood hazard area, SFHA, you have to have a flood policy. In fact, if you're in one of those zones, you're required by any lien holder or mortgage on a home. You can't buy a property without flood insurance. So you have to have it at the time. And I'll tell you, Jeff, it's the ebbs and flows of the flood insurance program. I mean, it's been subsidized by the federal government for pretty much since its inception, which means it's really in the red right now. So they've had to do a lot of legislation to try to fix things, and it's becoming increasingly expensive for those in the special flood hazard areas to even be able to afford or obtain coverage. Into the market comes all these private flood insurance companies that will write you, and those are the ones that you would need if you live in a town that is not participating with FEMA. So if you're in a town like Wheelock or Sheffield or a few other towns I could think of. Lunenburg, I believe, would fall on the list as well. If you're in an area that does not participate with FEMA, you don't have the ability to get a National Flood Insurance Program policy, but maybe a mortgagee has identified that you're in a zone that you need it. Well, that's when you'd get a private flood insurance company, and there's many out there that have come to the forefront, especially over the past couple of years, with the national program becoming increasingly expensive.
Mike, if I might just cut in here just a little bit, I remember a couple of times in the past that we've had this conversation. There's a difference between a flood and a spring runoff.
So it has to do with an inundation of water. All right. So, and interestingly enough, the definition of flood is defined separately both with FEMA and with these private flood insurance companies. FEMA describes it as an inundation of water that has impacted, I believe, 2 or more acres or 3 or more properties. So if it is the spring runoff that has caused that and caused an accumulation of water that has now impacted a large area, that could trigger flood coverage. Now, in the private market, they have a broader definition of flood, which means they cover more types of losses. So spring runoff could very well be an easier trigger of flood coverage with a private carrier. One of the main differences, Jeff, between the national program with the government and the private, the national program says, look, if you're in an eligible town, we really, with very few exceptions, we have to write it. Whereas the private guys they underwrite in the beginning and say whether they want it or not before they would even allow policy coverage to be issued.
So with those 2 examples, Mike, that is pretty good explanation and should bring some understanding how important it is to have a conversation with your insurance provider on this and all insurance-related topics.
Right. Now, let's say, Jeff, you give the forecast, or Mark gives the forecast and says, watch out, here comes some serious rains, and people start getting a little skittish. And somebody says, you know what, if we buy a flood policy today, we'll be covered, we'll be fine, right? Last closing thought on this is there's multiple types of ways that flood policies are issued. They're either issued the normal standard, which is a 30-day waiting period, meaning if you see in the forecast rain and flood waters are coming and you want to buy a flood policy, if you buy it today, it won't start until April 16th. All right, the only time you can get a flood policy sooner than that is if it's a transactional thing with a mortgagee for a loan. If that's the case, they will let you issue coverage the date of a loan closing. So I guess if you really want to do it, get a loan.
Well, I was going to say, now I've never bought a house, never have, probably never will be able to, but I understand from people I've heard go through the process, buying and financing a home isn't done in 24 hours. No, it's a process. It's an incredible process, and so that's a protection. You can't. Insurance companies do not want you to insure for something that's predicted and coming now. So that's why a lot of companies, if there's a fire season or a hurricane season and they're active hurricane or fire, companies will suspend the ability to write you coverage. So, if it's imminent, they don't really want to just say, sure, pay us for one premium and we'll pay a huge sum of money for a loss. So you need to be aware of that there is a 30-day waiting period for a non-loan closing related flood policy. That would be like me going down to the local car dealership here, buying a brand new Mustang GT 500, and then heading off to Thunder Road for spectator drags.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. Tell them how to get in touch with you, bud.
Sure. You can give us a call. We're available at 748-5224. Our office is on Portland Street in St. Johnsbury. Online for free home and auto quotes at thebarrettagency.com. Google, Facebook, and YouTube. Just look for Barrett Insurance Agency.
And, of course, tune in Tuesday mornings at 8:35 for Good Policies. Mike, stay safe, stay warm. Hope you, the little man and the missus, have a great week. We'll chat next Tuesday, okay?
Yeah. I hope so. Sounds good. You as well.
All right. Good Policies, Magic in the Morning with music from Greg Kinby.